There's a hard truth about war that politicians rarely admit. Wars are not decided by speeches. They're not decided by press conferences. And they're definitely not decided by television narratives. Wars are decided by logistics. And right now, if you look at the hard numbers coming out of the Middle East, the war between the United States, Israel, and Iran is moving toward a dangerous tipping point. Because in modern warfare, the decisive equation is an ideology. It's mathematics. Missile mathematics. How many offensive missiles does Iran have left? How many interceptor missiles do the United States and Israel still possess? That simple balance could determine how this war ends. And at the moment, the numbers suggest something troubling. We are now roughly 9 days into the conflict. That matters because we already have a historical reference point. In the previous escalation between Iran and Israel, the intense phase of fighting lasted almost exactly 12 days. Both sides pushed their military systems close to exhaustion. Missile inventories dropped. Air defenses began to strain. And political pressure started to mount. Today, we are already approaching that same point again. If this pattern holds, we could be only 2 or 3 days away from the moment where both sides reach the limits of what their missile stockpiles can sustain. And once that point is reached, the war stops being about weapons. It becomes about endurance, willpower, dart, and political survival. Let's start with the American military presence in the region. The United States currently has 2 carrier strike groups deployed in the theater. One centered around the aircraft carrier USS Gerald R. Ford, the other around the USS Abraham Lincoln. Each carrier group is protected by several Arleigh Burke-class destroyers. These destroyers are some of the most capable warships ever built. Each one carries roughly 96 vertical launch cells. Inside those launch tubes are a mixture of weapons. Tomahawk cruise missiles for offensive strikes, and interceptor missiles designed to shoot down incoming ballistic threats. But here is the problem. Interceptor missiles disappear quickly because defensive warfare is incredibly expensive. To reliably destroy a single incoming ballistic missile, the standard procedure is to launch 2 interceptors. Not 1, 2. You double the cost of defense just to ensure the probability of success. Now imagine what happens when multiple ballistic missiles are fired at once. Suddenly, your missile inventory begins to disappear very fast. Reports from the battlefield indicate that Iranian missiles have already targeted American naval forces. In one instance, several ballistic missiles were launched toward the carrier group surrounding the USS Abraham Lincoln. To defend against those incoming threats, interceptor missiles had to be fired. And once those interceptors are used, they're gone. They cannot simply be reloaded at sea. That's a critical detail most people don't understand. Warships cannot magically replenish their missile inventories in the middle of the ocean. To reload vertical launch systems, a ship must return to port. And that's where the next problem appears. Many of the American facilities in the Gulf region have already come under attack. Some ports are damaged, some are unsafe, and the alternative, sailing all the way back to the United States, would take weeks. Weeks during which those ships would effectively be removed from the battlefield. Now let's look at the Iranian strategy. Because so far, Iran appears to be fighting a very calculated war. They did not begin the conflict by immediately deploying their most advanced weapons. Instead, they started with lower-tier missile systems, cruise missiles, subsonic and supersonic projectiles. Why? Because those weapons force missile defenses to respond. Every interception costs the defender precious interceptor missiles. In other words, Iran is slowly draining the defensive arsenal of its opponents. Only after those defensive stocks are weakened would Iran potentially introduce more advanced weapons, including hypersonic systems capable of traveling at extraordinary speeds and maneuvering in ways traditional missile defenses struggle to stop. If that phase begins while American interceptor inventories are already low, the consequences could be severe. Because at that point, U.S. naval forces themselves could become targets. And losing even a single major warship would transform this conflict overnight. But Iran's strategy didn't stop there. They also struck something even more important than missiles: sensors. One of the key early warning radar systems used to detect incoming ballistic missiles was reportedly destroyed in Jordan. That radar provided critical warning time, roughly 10 to 15 minutes. Those minutes are what allow missile defense systems to track threats, calculate intercept solutions, and launch countermeasures. Remove that radar, and suddenly the entire defensive network becomes partially blind. This is classic military doctrine. Before you destroy the shield, you destroy the eyes that guide it. Iran has also adopted a decentralized command structure. Instead of relying on a single centralized command center, the country's Revolutionary Guard units operate through multiple regional districts. Each district controls its own arsenal of missiles and drones. Each has its own list of targets. That means even if parts of Iran's command system are disrupted, other units can continue launching attacks independently. This type of decentralized warfare makes it extremely difficult for an opponent to shut down the entire system. It ensures the attacks keep coming. So where does this leave the United States? Some voices in Washington have suggested the possibility of a ground war. But that idea runs into harsh strategic realities. Iran has a massive standing military, hundreds of thousands of troops, a large Revolutionary Guard force, and terrain that strongly favors defenders. History tells us something important about wars in this region. The United States can dominate the air, but occupying and controlling territory is an entirely different challenge. Just ask the veterans of Iraq.I or Afghanistan. And that brings us to the broader strategic question. What happens politically if this war drags on? The American public has historically shown very limited tolerance for prolonged conflicts with mounting casualties. Vietnam.D, Iraq.Do, Afghanistan. All of them eventually collapsed under the weight of public exhaustion. Large numbers of casualties, what soldiers grimly call body bags, change political realities very quickly. And this conflict is unfolding in the middle of a politically sensitive period in the United States. But the consequences go far beyond Washington. This war is already creating serious economic shockwaves. Oil markets are reacting. Energy supply chains are under stress. And countries far from the battlefield are starting to feel the impact. Take India, for example. A significant portion of its energy supply comes from the Gulf region. Natural gas shipments, petroleum flows. Any disruption there ripples across the entire economy. Energy prices rise. Inflation increases. And governments suddenly find themselves dealing with economic instability. That's why many countries are now quietly pushing for one thing: a ceasefire. Because the longer this war continues, the greater the risk that it spirals into something far larger. A regional war, an economic crisis, or a military disaster for one side or the other. War planners sometimes believe conflicts will be quick, clean, decisive. History usually proves them wrong. And right now, the trajectory of this war suggests that both sides may have underestimated just how dangerous this escalation could become. Which is why the most rational outcome may not be victory, but diplomacy. Before the mathematics of war pushes everyone past the point of no return. If you found this analysis valuable, subscribe for more strategic breakdowns of the world's most important conflict. Because understanding the reality behind the headlines has never mattered more.